Yeah, I'm using a lighter. Lunchtime. I'm smoking some Classic Samsun from McLellan from 2010 in the Grand Oriental series. Classic Samsun in the hinterlands just south of the Black Sea in eastern Turkey. These prized Oriental tobaccos draw their sweet, nutty flavor from the rocky soil as they have done for 350 years. Enjoy the distinctive, mellow, pleasant character of the finest Samsun in this fine blend. So the Black Sea is now kind of on everybody's geographic radar because of Ukraine. Good for Americans who tend to be kind of provincial. That's where this stuff comes from. It's good, really mellow. This is a what? I do not remember the guy's name. It's unstamped. Nice wood. There are a few flaws, a few little owies there in the wood, like little sand pits. But really nice wood, nice thick walls there. A nice size, you know. It's kind of, to me, the ideal billiard shape. It's big enough, thick enough walls, tall enough. Shank could be maybe a little huskier for me. Nice wide bit. So, not too long after I started pipe smoking, I corresponded with a guy in Pennsylvania, and his dad carved pipes. And so I bought a few of them. Good value. And really, really nice pipes. So, really professionally finished. So, mining the hard rock. About Silverton, primarily, in the San Juan Mountains. So there's some great stories here. There's still, the mill shut down in 1995, finally, after fits and starts. But it was the biggest gold mine in the country for a long time. And originally, the mill was down in the valley, and it was supplied with ore from ore cars, kind of like a ski lift, in these buckets that came down. So the tramways were really amazing. This country is incredibly rugged, steep, avalanche prone, rock slide prone. It's just it's a crazy place to be doing anything, you know, other than being a mountain goat. So they built these tramways, and there was a big boarding house at the Shenandoah Dives property, which was below Silver Lake, which was up in the bowl. It was this lake up there. So they built the boarding house in the end of the tramway to below that. And so the workings of the mine extended through the mountain and up into the Silver Lake, older workings. But the boarding house was really amazing. And there was water power up there. So hydropower was really a thing. And it was all powered pretty much by hydro. Way back in the early 1900s. So Tesla famously, over by Telluride, I never did see that movie, you know, that came out like 6 years ago, about the competition between Westinghouse and Tesla. But Tesla was a big believer in DC power, and our whole electrical grid would look very different if he had had his way. So But he did many of his experiments over by Telluride, which, as the crow flies, is about 18 miles from Silverton. By road, it's like 80 miles, because 13,000 foot passes between Telluride and Silverton. Summer only and perilous. The Black Bear Road. You should look it up on YouTube, the Black Bear Road. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, some good stories here. See if the camera's still working. Yeah, hey, that's a good thing. So, right now we're talking in the 1930s, in development of, he kind of goes chronologically. But that's an example of one of the tramways, the tram towers. A number have been knocked down by avalanches, but some are still there. And the ore cars are suspended over the road to the mill. So, I mean, it's front and center and present. It's a great place to explore. In the summer, the tram was usually a great way to get to work, and often funny things happened along the way. Here, let's make a little change here. There we go. Kind of set the exposure. On one occasion, food supplies were being shipped up from the mill to the boarding house at the mine, which was at like 11,200 feet. A stalk of bananas broke loose from its heavy cloth sack before being put into a tram bucket. With fresh fruit considered a rare treat, and with the opportunity presenting itself, the mill tram crew down in the valley, as well as several other mill workers, helped themselves to the delicacy. Finally, on its way to the mine, the partially depleted stalk of bananas was spied by the high wire crew working on one of the towers. After they stopped the bucket and helped themselves to the treat, it was allowed again to continue on to the mine. The mine tram crew, which is up at the boarding house and the mine portal at 11,200 feet, seeing the almost bare stalk and knowing that they would probably be blamed for the missing fruit anyway, indulged in several bananas themselves. When the boarding house manager realized the situation and saw no more than 5 bananas left on the stalk, he immediately summoned the mine superintendent. Vern Hamish, looking over the practically empty banana stalk and knowing full well what had happened, scratched his head and exclaimed, "They sure don't grow 'em like they used to, do they, Ed?" It was a story from Zeke Zanoni. Winters were the hardest. The tram was knocked out in February of 1938, and iron workers were summoned from Denver to repair it. The county opened the road, such as it was, and kept it open so supplies and materials could be brought to the different tower sites. The Denver men were lodged in the Grand Imperial Hotel in town. At that time, the owner spent little money heating the downstairs and even less heating the men's rooms upstairs. One morning, the boss gathered the workers around him in the lobby. "Boys, we lost one of our men last night, froze to death." Harry, on the outside of the circle and not likely to miss a beat, spoke right out. "I'm not surprised. What room was he in?" The tram was back up and running in May. In February of 1938, the second tower was struck by a slide, and 4 more towers were also pulled over. So there's a picture of that. But in the winter of 1942, it was a different story for Clyde Pitts. He was coming off shift, and instead of staying inside and climbing the ladders down to the tram house on that snowy night, so he came out of the mine portal, and you would have to descend down or take a little stub tram to get to the boarding house. He decided to use the catwalk. He had his hands full carrying 6 to 10 cartons of cigarettes. You could say those cigarettes almost killed him, because suddenly, in the dark, a slide engulfed him, leaving him buried but alive and able to move only slightly. He fished his knife from his overalls and cut the sleeves from his sweatshirt. After 12 hours of digging, using the cuffs for mittens and the knife for a shovel, he surfaced into the cold first light of morning. The hole he emerged from looked like a corkscrew as he twisted and turned his 6.5-foot frame to freedom. With little ado, with wrists scratched from where he had cut his sleeves off, he climbed right on the tram and went on down into town and into the bar. He told whoever would listen that he figured he'd had it. Just to make sure he was all right, he stayed in town for almost a week. Then it was back to work. We wish we knew if he quit smoking. The Shenandoah tram was used to haul the ore from the mine because the rugged country made year-round trucking impractical. The tram operated from 1930 to 1953 and from 1959 to 61. There were 50 or more aerial trams built in San Juan County. The Shenandoah was the only one built with steel towers. It ran uphill almost 2 miles, rising 1,400 feet. There were 12 towers. Round-bottom buckets carried 1 ton. Angled buckets carried 1,600 pounds. There were up to 52 buckets in use at one time. An average of 590 to 600 buckets of ore were sent to the mill in an 8-hour shift. George Bingle was the mayor and also ran the tram in that last year of operation, 1961. The mayor's job never did pay anything, and George loved machines. Andy Hanahan tells this one. Me and John Cook were wanting to go to Silver Lake the next day, and we asked George if we might ride the tram. See, that would put us right where the trail to the lake starts up. Sure, boys, you sign these cards and we'll get you up. Next day, we showed up and climbed aboard. Trouble was, we'd started late, and by the time we'd gotten to the trailhead, a few avalanches had rumbled down, and the weather wasn't so hot. We could see a lot of our walk was going to be in the snow. Our enthusiasm, unlike the snow, was melting fast. Just then, they brought a fellow out of the mine with a twisted, broken leg. They loaded him in a bucket, splinted leg and all. One of the men who'd seen us standing around said, "Here's your chance, boys, if you want to get on down. There won't be no more ore coming down until late afternoon." We didn't waste much time thinking about that and jumped in 3 buckets behind the injured miner. When we got down to where we were hanging above the Animas River, which is a long way, the tram stopped. I turned to John. "Must be they're unloading that poor guy. We'll be going in a minute." 10 minutes later, I wasn't so sure. A half hour later, we were wondering if we jumped, would the water below us be deep enough? Well, George knew there wasn't any ore coming down until later on, and still thought we were on our way to Silver Lake. Fact is, nobody knew we were hanging out there on the highest part of the tram, dangling above the river on a cold, wet spring day. Almost 4 hours later, the tram finally started up. George knew about 25 buckets would go by before the first ore would be coming in. Of course, we were only 3 buckets out, and pretty quick we spotted George kind of slouched down there in the tram house. "Hello, George!" we shouted in unison. Man, he jumped 6 different directions at once. The next time we went to Silver Lake, I know we walked. Here's a postcard from 1917, shows the mine buildings as they must have appeared during the expansion years of 1904 to 1908. Postage was a penny. This is the Old 100 mine portal and boarding house on Galena Mountain. Let's see, pull it back. Hard to see. The mining claims I have are down behind the hill over here. Silverton's farther down. Judge N.C. Maxwell of San Juan County was the mine manager of the Old 100 in the years 1904 to 1908. An interesting article by Jack Foster appeared in the Rocky Mountain News in 1953, telling of life at the mine in the early 1900s. The judge remembered the bitter weather and the blizzards that plagued the mine. There was really no place for the miners to walk. They had to jump like mountain goats from place to place. They could walk into the mine shaft, now sealed with snow and ice this year, 1953, or into the tram house, or to the Johnny on the ledge outside, but that was all. He recalled that at one time there was a cook, a baker, and 2 waiters caring for the needs of the crew, and they could get food and water only from the valley below by ore buckets. Apparently, in 1939, there was an effort made to do an exploration and sampling program. On July 14th, a crew arrived. Jim Murphy was cook, but on August 17 they left, leaving the note, "This is hell. We started to heaven and landed square in hell." And this was only summertime. And it's just a sheer cliff down to the bottom of the valley. Let's see. Miss Virginia Graham, Virgie as she was known to her friends, once told me about going up to the Old 100 boarding house on the tram with several other Silverton girls to attend a dancing party. This would have been around the turn of the century. A number of college boys were working at the mine, and they had planned quite an elaborate affair. She remembered that each young lady was given a pretty china cup and saucer as a party favor. It seems that the mine boarding house was using a particular brand of coffee, each package of which contained the china as prize. The resourceful young men had saved enough for each girl to have one. From Ruth Rathmell, Silverton Memories. So we actually stayed in that boarding house overnight. Take a little cliff trail to get to it. It's way above timberline. And just, honest to God, just perched on a cliff. It just is dizzying to even be in it. But it was well anchored to the side of Galena Mountain with cables and bolts. And in the early 2000s, it was actually restored by the Silverton, or the San Juan County Historical Society. So it should last forever. They re-roofed it, they did repairs, and made sure it was safe. So it is really quite a place. Here's a pretty good one. This is early Colorado trams. Colorado's earliest ski lifts. So this is from the town of Eureka, which is up at the head of the Animas Valley. And the Sunnyside tram stretched 3 miles between the town of Eureka and the mine. Between the mine at Lake Emma and the Long Terry span were 2 tension or weigh stations. Their purpose was to keep the cables taut. The lower station still stands today. About halfway down the hill from the mine was an angle station. This was located just above Midway. Originally a mill was located midway. Today the site is mostly boards and a foundation, and the tram ran from there down to Eureka. When the big mill was built in Eureka in 1918, the angle station was also built and became the main route between the mine and the Eureka mill. The Sunnyside tram carried many buckets, but their capacity was only 600 to 700 pounds. You could ride them up, but you couldn't ride them down unless you were dead or injured. The ride down was reserved for buckets of ore. In 1938, when Sunnyside briefly reopened, you could make $4.40 a day working on the tram. For $1.50 a month, you could get hospital care for the whole family. 4 men worked the tram at the mill end down below, 4 at Midway, and 6 up at the mine. Shorty was a steel worker, and when a bucket got wrapped around a tram tower, Shorty was the one to climb the tower and free it. Well, this time he got up there, quite a ways up, about 80 feet, and found the bucket had really wrapped itself around the tower. He started working on it and eventually got it loose, but when the darn thing got free, it flipped him off the tower. Shorty fell that 80 feet right down on his back and into the snow. Sometimes even winter has its advantages. When he came to, there was a bunch of fellow workers standing around looking at him. Shorty looked up from the bottom of his impression in the snow and swore he was in heaven. Well, the boss broke that bubble. No way, Shorty. We gathered him up, got him down to the mill at Eureka, into Silverton, and on the train to Durango and the hospital. The only thing wrong with him that they could find was a case of gonorrhea. Anyway, I could read on and on. I love these stories. So, from another time. So like I say, there's a really great but longer story. So let me know if you like this, you know. It's something to do while you smoke a pipe. You can do something else and listen or whatever. But that story by, who was that, John Trumbull, is just spectacular. So, and fairly recent, in the 1930s. I mean, Silverton, yeah, dates from the early 1870s. So there's a lot of history there.